Typically, the categories of sanctions fall into four broad areas. Globally, it's going to be the same. It's not going to be effective for every other country in the same way for reasons that we've already discussed under the heading the long arm of US law. So the first is to restrict commerce in international trade by the target. The second is to restrict access to finance and markets by the target. The third is to restrict entities and individuals. These may or may not be associated with the country. I shared with you the Osama bin Laden example. The fourth is to control the flow of dual-use goods, weapons of mass destruction, nuclear armament, chemical warfare are three broad areas. But then the fourth, which is ever growing and has achieved significance but not mind share, is digital products, digital assets for cyber warfare. And cyber warfare is indeed often considered now as the future of war. Let's look at some instances. The Caesar Act requires the president to impose sanctions, it's not discretionary, on any persons found to have engaged in a significant transaction with the government of Syria, provided aircraft spare parts for military use to Syria, provided significant construction or engineering services to the government of Syria. Okay, so this is very, very focused on Syria, that particular act. PISA, which is Protecting Europe's Energy Security Act, mandates sanctions for certain conduct that supports Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream 2 pipeline construction projects. Now, this is to stop Western Europe from getting further addicted and tied in and locked in to Russian oil and gas supplies. So there's the map. There are all those red lines. These red lines move from the right of your screen. Sources in Russia of oil and gas. One of the largest oil reserves in the world are with Russia, and prospectively in the Arctic region. A good 40 to 60% of the Arctic region is controlled by Russia, which has equal amount of oil and gas reserves. And you can head over to the geopolitical risks program if you want to understand that the economics of Russia's power. While it's not political power, there's unavoidable economic power which just cannot be ignored no matter who you are, including the US of A. So you have all this oil and gas feeding Western Europe. There's Ukraine in the middle of the oil pipeline. Let me just go back over. Look at the area of the map. See the red lines from right to left. Russia used to pay Ukraine significant amount of oil and gas carrying charges for the transit via pipelines going through Ukraine. And so it came up with Nord Stream, which goes under the Baltic Sea and reaches Germany, and Southern Stream, which is Turk Stream, which goes through the Black Sea and reaches Germany. So that Ukraine does not have to be paid any carrying charges, which was contributing several $billion, I think about $3 billion to the Ukrainian economy, and Ukraine was tending towards NATO. And so running war between Russia and Ukraine, running conflict, arguments between Russia, Ukraine, and Russia decides to weaken its own dependence on Ukraine for pipeline transit. So there you have the supplier country on the right. On the left, you have customer countries, principally Germany, but a whole bunch of Western Europe. And proximity of the markets and supply. If you are getting your supplies from just next door, then transit costs alone save you a significant bunch of money. And flow rather than tankers is more efficient and more economic. Tankers have to come and go, load, unload. Flow, just turn the pipe on at one end and it flows through to the other end. And for those of you who want to see this in cinema, look at the James Bond movie, which has the oil pipeline features in the story. So yeah, one day in 2009 when Mr. Vladimir Putin was bored, he switched off the gas pipeline and just gave Western Europe a taste of what it is to mess around with Russia. The temperature at that time was anything from 1 to as low as -20, and no energy to heat your homes. So we have the German regulator looking at PSCA and putting the brake on Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 2 has been 95 to 98% ready forever. And now after the most recent flare-up, we really don't know what's going to happen to Nord Stream. When we look at oil and gas sector, you will notice that there are a number of companies, American, that means they were squarely the target in primary sanctions, not to do anything for Nord Stream, but they did do stuff for Nord Stream. Okay. Meanwhile, US legislation, which is not squarely sanctions, but interesting to know, there is something called the Kleptocracy Asset Recovery Initiative. This is a law which flows from Patriot Act and anti-money laundering and so on and so forth, which aims to find money in Western world stolen by dictators and regimes from other parts of the world and repatriate that money to the source country, because they're poor countries. So here you have Nigeria, a poor country. The dictator Sani Abacha looted the country, 308 million seized from bank accounts of former military dictator from US, the British island of Jersey and Nigeria itself, and this money is going to be returned to Nigeria. Now that one act alone shows you the long arm of the US law. It can reach into bank accounts and impound money. In this case, from a stolen dictator. In other cases, from pretty much anyone. If it's a sanctioned entity, found ways to make money, parked it anywhere. As Russia discovers, a good chunk of its dollar reserves in New York stand frozen, denying Russia access to money. To repay whom? The bondholders in the US who had purchased Russian government bonds. Complex, intricate, interconnected world. Now, that completes our look at the US sanctions framework. I hope that gave you a good idea of primary sanctions, secondary sanctions, of how events in the political, economic, social space, specific incidents trigger either countrywide sanctions or specific sanctions. You know that the US has the rule of law and therefore how law flows. Sanctions designations can be challenged even by Putin's friends in the US legal system. And then you have the long arm of the US law, which can make sure that US's bidding is done even in remote parts of the world. Thank you.